Please look into this animation entitled The Holographic Mirror, taking into account its mutual co-definition, and that the spiral emerges from and submerges back to 4. Then use your comprehension to evaluate the relationship between the concept of identity and the concept of occult. Then please examine how occult mentality and its expression can be identified through how a person engages in dialogue and how they behave within modern society. The Holographic Mirror, Identity, Consciousness, and the Cult Mentality. Image 1. The intricate diagram titled The Holographic Mirror presents a sophisticated philosophical framework that reveals deep connections between consciousness, identity formation, and the psychological mechanisms underlying cult mentality. This multidimensional representation, with its central spiral emerging from and returning to the number 4, offers profound insights into how identity can become distorted through cult-like thinking patterns. The holographic principle and consciousness. The concept of holographic consciousness suggests that consciousness has structural and functional similarities to a hologram, where the information needed to model the whole is contained within each constituent component. This holographic principle, when applied to consciousness, proposes that individual awareness reflects and contains aspects of universal consciousness. The image's geometric patterns, particularly the interconnected lines forming complex relationships between different conceptual categories, Ubuntu, when, where, what, why, who, how, and all, mirror this holographic understanding where each element contains information about the whole system. In holographic theories of consciousness, the basic constituents of human consciousness are proposed to be two basic pairs of duality consciousness: change-unchanged duality consciousness and inclusion-exclusion duality consciousness. This duality is reflected in the diagram's balanced presentation of opposing yet interconnected concepts, suggesting that healthy consciousness maintains awareness of these complementary aspects. The spiral, symbol of consciousness evolution. The central spiral in the diagram, emerging from and submerging back to the number 4, carries profound spiritual significance. Spirals are often regarded as symbols of growth, evolution, and transformation, with their continuous winding form suggesting a cyclical nature representing the eternal cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The spiral symbolizes expansion, progress, and the journey of the soul, while also embodying the inner journey of self-discovery and introspection. The fact that the spiral emerges from and returns to 4 is particularly significant. In many spiritual traditions, the number 4 represents stability, foundation, and wholeness. The 4 elements, 4 directions, 4 seasons. This suggests that genuine spiritual and psychological development involves expanding outward through experience, while maintaining connection to foundational principles, and ultimately integrating these experiences back into a stable center. The spiral's inward motion is a metaphor for personal introspection and self-realization, while its outward motion represents the expansion of consciousness and awareness. This dual movement mirrors healthy identity development, where individuals explore various aspects of themselves and their world while maintaining a coherent sense of self. Identity formation, and psychological development. Healthy identity formation is comprised of goals, values, and beliefs to which a person is committed, involving the awareness of consistency in self over time and recognition of this consistency by others. The process provides 5 essential functions: structure and order to self-knowledge, a sense of consistency and coherence to beliefs, goals, and self-knowledge, a sense of continuity for one's history and future, goals and direction, and a sense of personal control of choices and outcomes. The diagram's comprehensive framework, showing the interconnections between various aspects of existence, Ubuntu, temporal dimensions, purpose, identity, action, and totality, represents this healthy integration of different aspects of the self into a coherent whole. The balanced presentation suggests that mature identity development requires acknowledging and integrating multiple dimensions of experience rather than reducing oneself to a single aspect. The cult mentality, distorted identity and consciousness. Cults represent a pathological distortion of normal identity formation processes. At the core of cultic thinking is a social power dynamic between leader and followers, where the leader provides an explanation of the world that resists critical examination. This creates an in-group and out-group dynamic where good and evil are defined in terms of the interests of the in-group, and followers are encouraged to surrender their critical thinking abilities. The cult mentality fundamentally disrupts the natural spiral of consciousness development depicted in the diagram. Instead of the healthy expansion and return that characterizes genuine spiritual growth, cult thinking creates a closed loop where members become trapped in repetitive thought patterns that prevent authentic self-exploration and growth. Identity fusion in cult dynamics. Research in social psychology has identified identity fusion as a visceral feeling of oneness with a group that can lead to extreme pro-group behaviors. In cult contexts, this fusion becomes pathological, as members' individual identities become so intertwined with the group that they lose their sense of personal agency and critical thinking capacity. The diagram's balanced interconnections contrast sharply with this fusion, where healthy relationships between different aspects of consciousness become collapsed into a single, rigid identification. When identity fusion occurs in cult settings, members experience a loss of individual identity and become receptive to extreme acts to protect their sense of identity and beliefs. This represents a perversion of the natural human need for belonging and meaning, exploiting fundamental psychological drives for manipulative purposes. Linguistic manipulation and thought control. Cults employ sophisticated linguistic techniques to control consciousness and identity. Thought-terminating cliches are easily memorized expressions aimed at shutting down independent thinking or questioning. Examples include phrases like "trust the plan," "it is what it is," or "just have faith." These linguistic tools prevent members from engaging in the critical reflection necessary for healthy identity development. Cults create specialized language and terminology that distinguishes members from outsiders, fostering a sense of exclusivity while isolating members from external perspectives. This linguistic manipulation represents an attack on the holographic nature of consciousness described in the diagram, where instead of maintaining awareness of multiple perspectives and dimensions, consciousness becomes constrained to a narrow range of approved thoughts and expressions. Behavioral patterns of cult mentality in modern society. The cult mentality manifests in modern society through several identifiable behavioral patterns in dialogue and social interaction. Dialogue characteristics. Authoritarian communication. Individuals exhibiting cult-like thinking often display authoritarian communication patterns where questioning or dissent is met with immediate dismissal or aggression. They may use phrases that shut down discussion rather than encourage genuine exploration of ideas. Binary thinking. Cult-influenced individuals frequently engage in polarized thinking, where complex issues are reduced to simple good versus evil narratives. This contrasts sharply with the multidimensional integration shown in the holographic mirror diagram. Appeal to authority. Rather than engaging with the substance of arguments, those with cult mentality often defer to the authority of their chosen leader or ideology, refusing to consider alternative perspectives. Emotional manipulation. Cult-influenced individuals may employ emotional manipulation tactics such as guilt, fear, or shame to control conversations and relationships, rather than engaging in authentic emotional exchange. Social behavior patterns. Social isolation. Individuals with cult mentality often gradually isolate themselves from friends, family, and social connections that might challenge their beliefs. This isolation prevents the kind of diverse input necessary for healthy identity development. Conformity pressure. They may exhibit intense pressure for others to conform to their belief system, becoming hostile or rejecting toward those who maintain different perspectives. 19. Information control. Cult-influenced individuals often avoid or dismiss information sources that contradict their worldview, preferring to consume only information that confirms their existing beliefs. This creates an echo chamber that reinforces distorted thinking patterns. Loss of personal agency, perhaps most significantly, individuals with cult mentality may demonstrate decreased capacity for independent decision-making, consistently deferring to groupthink or leader directives rather than exercising personal judgment. The mirror function, self-reflection and recovery. The concept of the mirror in the diagram title carries deep psychological significance. Mirrors can be used as therapeutic tools and metaphysical bridges to one's inner consciousness, facilitating introspection and self-concern, connection and attachment to something beyond self, and taking action to help others. However, for individuals influenced by cult mentality, the mirror experience becomes distorted. Research shows that mirror self-experience can be profoundly unsettling, confronting individuals with how they appear to others and forcing recognition of their existence in an intersubjective space. For cult members, this confrontation with their authentic self can be particularly threatening because it challenges the constructed identity imposed by the group. When seeing oneself in the mirror, one is seeing oneself as others see them, adopting an alienating perspective on oneself. For individuals recovering from cult influence, this mirror work can be crucial for reconstructing authentic self-identity separate from the group identification. Pathways to recovery and authentic identity. Recovery from cult mentality requires reconnecting with the natural spiral of consciousness development depicted in the diagram. This involves rebuilding critical thinking. Individuals must learn to question information sources and develop independent analytical skills, moving away from thought-terminating cliches toward genuine intellectual exploration. Diversifying social connections. Rebuilding relationships outside the cult environment provides essential feedback and perspective necessary for healthy identity development. Emotional processing. Addressing the emotional manipulation and trauma experienced in cult environments is essential for restoring authentic emotional responses and relationships. Spiritual integration. Rather than rejecting spirituality entirely, individuals can learn to distinguish between authentic spiritual exploration and manipulative spiritual control, reconnecting with the genuine spiral of consciousness development. 28. Conclusion. The holographic mirror as guide. The holographic mirror diagram serves as a powerful guide for understanding both healthy consciousness development and its pathological distortions in cult mentality. The balanced, interconnected representation of different aspects of existence contrasts sharply with the rigid, hierarchical, and closed systems characteristic of cult thinking. The spiral emerging from and returning to for reminds us that authentic spiritual and psychological development involves expansion and exploration while maintaining connection to foundational principles. This natural rhythm of growth stands in stark contrast to the trapped, repetitive patterns of cult mentality that prevent genuine development. By understanding these dynamics, we can better recognize cult-like thinking patterns in ourselves and others, while cultivating the kind of open, integrated consciousness represented in the diagram. The holographic principle suggests that each individual contains the potential for accessing universal wisdom and understanding, but this potential can only be realized through the kind of open, questioning, and integrated approach to consciousness that cults systematically destroy. The ultimate message of the holographic mirror is one of hope. That regardless of how distorted our identity may become through various forms of manipulation and control, the fundamental spiral of consciousness remains accessible, always offering the possibility of return to authentic self-understanding and genuine spiritual development. Please explain every aspect of personal identity that has the potential to be influenced by a cult-like mentality, besides our typical religious identity. Aspects of personal identity vulnerable to cult-like mentality beyond religious identity. Cult-like mentality represents a pervasive psychological phenomenon that extends far beyond traditional religious contexts, infiltrating virtually every aspect of human identity formation and maintenance. Drawing from extensive research into cult dynamics, political psychology, and social influence, we can identify numerous dimensions of personal identity that are susceptible to cult-like manipulation and control. Political identity, the foundation of ideological control. Political identity emerges as one of the most vulnerable aspects of personal identity to cult-like manipulation. Political cults operate through sophisticated mechanisms that transform normal partisan allegiance into pathological devotion. Research demonstrates that political cults, as a new phenomenon in religious studies, result from ongoing processes in the post-secular period, including active formation of new movements and politicization of religion. The distinguishing characteristics of political cult mentality include requiring excessive devotion to a leader, using emotional manipulation techniques to heighten dependency, and garnering psychological benefits at the expense of the well-being of followers. Unlike healthy political engagement, political cult behavior manifests through unwavering devotion to the leader, divisive us versus them mentality, control of information, emotional dependency, and identity manipulation. Contemporary examples reveal how political movements can become cults when supporters hold their leader as infallible, displaying all-encompassing belief systems, excessive devotion to leadership, avoidance of criticism, and disdain for non-members. This transformation occurs when power in the political movement stems not from shared ideas or interests, but from the personality and will of one individual, creating what experts identify as a dangerous departure from healthy democratic participation. Professional and career identity, the workplace as cult environment. Professional identity represents another critical vulnerability to cult-like manipulation. Research reveals that workplace cult dynamics manifest through charismatic leaders who use charm to manipulate employees, employing gaslighting and other emotional manipulation techniques. Corporate cults are characterized by exclusive boys' club mentalities, where management holds power while shutting out talented individuals, creating stagnant work environments that stifle potential. Professional identity can be compromised when workplaces promote groupthink and conformity, where employees are expected to suppress dissenting opinions, leading to organizational stagnation. The technology industry particularly exemplifies cult-like workplace dynamics, where overwork is rebranded as passion, leaders are treated like prophets, and dissent equals disloyalty, creating psychological costs including burnout and ethical decay. Healthcare professionals face unique vulnerabilities, with research showing that physical therapists can become trapped in idea cults where favored ideas are supported while others are disparaged, requiring self-reflection marked by openness and humility. This professional cult mentality prevents adaptation to the unique needs, values, and preferences of each patient, highlighting how specialized knowledge can become weaponized for ideological control. The impact on career development is profound, as cult membership significantly affects career development and employment recovery. Former cult members often struggle with professional identity reconstruction, requiring specialized vocational rehabilitation services to address mental health symptoms and educational deficits. Cultural and ethnic identity, manipulation of heritage and belonging. Cultural and ethnic identity represents a particularly insidious target for cult-like manipulation because it exploits fundamental human needs for belonging and heritage. Research demonstrates that cultural identity manipulation involves creating local personality cults and using commemoration practices to consolidate collective identity. This process includes territorial assignment as an element of identity, where places become objects of cult-like devotion through manipulation, mythologization, and mystification. Ethnic identity manipulation can involve statistical manipulation, reclassification of individuals, and selective promotion of cultural practices to inflate minority statistics. Government authorities may employ strategies that facilitate identity confusion, erosion of authentic cultural practices, and increased social tensions within communities. The psychological mechanisms underlying this manipulation include symbolic interactionism and social identity theory, where leaders use religious or cultural symbols to align political narratives with deeply resonant cultural symbols. The vulnerability of ethnic identity to cult-like manipulation is particularly evident in how communities respond to ritual practices, where intensive shared rituals can strengthen national identity among minorities while reducing perceived discrimination. However, these same mechanisms can be exploited to create artificial community constructs based on forced collectivization and proclaimed cult of the people that ultimately prove non-viable in long-term development. Family identity, the most intimate form of cult control. Family identity represents perhaps the most devastating area of cult influence because it targets the foundational relationships that shape human development. Family cults use coercive control mechanisms similar to traditional cults, including isolation from the outside world, difficulty developing healthy relationships, mental health issues, and lack of boundaries. Research reveals that alienating parents resemble cult leaders through requiring excessive devotion, using emotional manipulation to heighten dependency, and garnering benefits at the expense of children's well-being. Parental alienation employs cult-like tactics including creating false narratives about the targeted parent, installing fear and dependency, and using children as weapons against former partners. The parallels between family cults and traditional cults include isolation from outside influences, control of information, emotional manipulation, and creation of dependency relationships. Abusive families function like cults through requiring codes of silence, pretending everything is fine to outsiders, subjection to powerful leaders, and economic exploitation of family members. Children growing up in cult-like families experience indoctrination from early ages, where the cult leader's demands always take priority over children's needs, teaching children to have no needs because they don't matter. This creates lasting damage to identity formation, emotional regulation, and capacity for healthy relationships. Gender and sexual identity, control of intimate self-expression. Gender and sexual identity represent particularly vulnerable aspects of personal identity because they intersect with fundamental questions of self-expression and intimate relationships. Cults systematically control sexuality and sex lives of members just as other aspects of life, with sexual control seen as the final step in objectification of cult members. Sexual exploitation in cults includes daily controls of sexuality, arranged marriages, forced sexual activity with leaders, and rape, representing the ultimate expression of leader power over followers. The psychological impact includes loss of autonomy, distorted understanding of consent, and difficulty establishing healthy intimate relationships after leaving. Research reveals that sexual minorities face particular vulnerability in cults, where sex-negative messages are often explicit in cult ideology. Gender identity manipulation can occur through online communities that use cult-like tactics to encourage youth to see transition as the only solution to struggles, employing peer pressure, social media influence, and activism to draw young people into ideological frameworks. The manipulation of gender identity involves sensory information temporarily affecting mental body representations, where altered experiences can impact gender identity and relation to gender groups. This demonstrates how fundamental aspects of self-perception can be influenced through environmental manipulation, educational and intellectual identity, thought control and learning. Educational identity encompasses how individuals understand themselves as learners, thinkers, and knowledge seekers. Cults systematically manipulate educational identity through thought-terminating cliches that nullify critical thinking and loaded language that redefines familiar terms to control perception. Educational manipulation includes deception, where cults trick recruits into committing to causes they don't understand, and thought reform that systematically breaks down personal sense of self. Academic institutions themselves can exhibit cult-like characteristics when they limit information available to students, discourage questioning of authority, and promote single ideological perspectives. Research shows that students are more likely to be receptive to cult affiliation, where they perceive information from media as positive toward cult groups. The vulnerability of educational identity is evident in how cults target educational settings, recognizing that young people in academic environments are particularly susceptible to ideological influence during identity formation periods. Youth attraction to cults is strengthened by the fact that cult rules are often better defined than those of mainstream society, providing certainty during uncertain developmental periods. Body image and physical identity, the cult of appearance. Physical identity and body image represent increasingly vulnerable aspects of personal identity in contemporary society. The cult of appearance is characterized by online communities that idealize physical attractiveness, leading to comparison with ideals that lower self-esteem and cause body dissatisfaction. Social media plays a key role in formation and dissemination of physical attractiveness ideals, making people perceive beauty as internal standards. The cult of thinness exercises dangerous control over girls and women, with media images of women worsening over time through increased stereotypes and misogynist messages. Research demonstrates that young women with eating disorders better recall advertisements showing thinness and weight loss products, suggesting that media serves as reinforcement rather than direct cause of body image disorders. Male body image is increasingly subjected to pressure of modeling, with discourse of disciplining the male body affecting socially acceptable ways of performing gender. Motivational bodybuilding content influences perception of body modification processes, presenting tools and regimes that can affect changing ways of performing masculinity. The psychological consequences include depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and distorted self-perception. The cult of the body is based on daily search for physical perfection, becoming a pole of deep desires and object of investment. Digital and social media identity, virtual cult environments. Digital identity represents a modern vulnerability that didn't exist in traditional cult contexts, but has become increasingly significant. Social media usage significantly affects consumer behavior and social identity, with digital platforms playing pivotal roles in shaping consumer actions and identities. Social media has dominant roles in shaping cultural identity, with significant changes in language use, fashion adoption, and value acceptance. Digital identity development through social media usage creates strong correlations with educational culture transformation, affecting how individuals understand themselves in academic and professional contexts. Social media provides entrepreneurs with platforms to showcase ventures and present desired selves, influencing entrepreneurial identity construction. The vulnerability manifests through social media's impact on self-concept among youth, where platforms serve as sources of validation, comparison, and identity formation. Social media frequency mediates the relationship between academic self-efficacy and professional identity, demonstrating how digital engagement affects educational outcomes. Online communities can develop cult-like characteristics through creating echo chambers, promoting groupthink, and discouraging dissenting perspectives. The addictive nature of social media platforms can mirror cult dependency, where individuals become emotionally reliant on digital validation and community approval. Consumer and brand identity, commercial cult manipulation. Consumer identity represents how individuals understand themselves through purchasing decisions, brand affiliations, and material possessions. Sneaker culture demonstrates how companies create content that reinforces feelings of identity and belonging as effective marketing strategies. This creates cult-like devotion to brands and products that extends far beyond rational consumer behavior. Commercial cults operate through creating exclusive communities around products or services, fostering us versus them mentalities between brand loyalists and outsiders. Multi-level marketing companies often exhibit cult-like characteristics including recruitment pressure, income promises, and social isolation of participants who question the system. The psychological mechanisms include identity fusion with brand communities, where individual identity becomes intertwined with commercial entities to the point of losing critical thinking about product value or company practices. Consumer cult mentality manifests through defending brand decisions regardless of evidence, attacking critics of preferred brands, and organizing consumer behavior around brand loyalty rather than practical needs. Conclusion: the holographic nature of identity vulnerability. The comprehensive analysis reveals that virtually every aspect of personal identity is vulnerable to cult-like manipulation and control. From political and professional affiliations to family relationships and body image, cult mentality exploits fundamental human needs for belonging, certainty, and meaning. The holographic mirror metaphor from the previous analysis remains relevant, just as each aspect of the diagram contained information about the whole system. Each dimension of identity vulnerability reflects broader patterns of psychological manipulation and social control. The interconnected nature of these identity vulnerabilities means that cult-like influence in one area often spreads to others. A person experiencing political cult mentality may find their family relationships, professional decisions, and even body image affected by the same thought patterns and emotional dependencies. Understanding these interconnections is crucial for recognition, prevention, and recovery from cult-like influence in all its manifestations. The ultimate defense against cult-like manipulation across all identity dimensions lies in maintaining the natural spiral of consciousness development depicted in the holographic mirror, the ability to expand awareness while maintaining connection to foundational principles, to question and explore while retaining coherent sense of self, and to integrate diverse experiences without losing critical thinking capacity. Recovery from cult influence in any domain requires rebuilding authentic identity separate from imposed group identification, regardless of whether that group is political, professional, cultural, familial, or commercial in nature. In order to build and maintain such an authentic identity, what signs can we look out for in our own thinking and behavior? Finally, how do we strengthen our ability to perceive contradictions and the lack of it within information and media, including the holographic mirror and the insights we've been developing through this conversation? Building and maintaining authentic identity, a comprehensive guide to self-awareness and critical thinking. Image 1. The journey of building and maintaining authentic identity while developing robust critical thinking capabilities represents one of the most crucial yet challenging endeavors in contemporary psychological development. Drawing from extensive research in psychology, cognitive science, and identity formation, this analysis provides a comprehensive framework for recognizing warning signs of unhealthy thinking patterns and strengthening our ability to perceive contradictions in information and media. The foundation of authentic identity, key warning signs to monitor. Building authentic identity requires constant vigilance regarding our internal thought processes and external behaviors. Research reveals several critical warning signs that indicate potential movement away from authentic self-expression toward cult-like or manipulated thinking patterns. Cognitive distortion patterns. All-or-nothing thinking represents one of the most dangerous early warning signs. When we find ourselves seeing things in black and white categories where performance that falls short of perfect becomes total failure, this indicates a departure from the nuanced, integrated thinking characteristic of authentic identity. The holographic mirror framework suggests that healthy consciousness maintains awareness of multiple dimensions simultaneously, rather than collapsing complex realities into binary choices. Overgeneralization emerges when we see a single negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat. This cognitive distortion prevents the natural spiral of consciousness development by trapping us in repetitive, limiting narratives about ourselves and our world. Authentic identity development requires the ability to see individual events within broader contexts without allowing single experiences to define our entire self-concept. Mental filtering and disqualifying the positive create psychological environments where we pick out single negative details and dwell on them exclusively, or reject positive experiences by insisting they don't count. These patterns mirror cult-like thinking, where contradictory evidence is systematically dismissed or reinterpreted to maintain rigid belief systems. Emotional and relational warning signs. Emotional reasoning becomes particularly dangerous when we assume that negative emotions necessarily reflect the way things really are. Authentic identity requires the ability to acknowledge emotions while maintaining critical distance from them, recognizing that feelings provide important information but should not become the sole basis for understanding reality. Jumping to conclusions through mind reading or fortune-telling indicates a departure from the careful, evidence-based thinking that characterizes healthy identity development. When we arbitrarily conclude that others are reacting negatively to us, or anticipate that things will turn out badly without sufficient evidence, we move away from the open, curious engagement with reality that authentic identity requires. Research in psychological manipulation reveals additional warning signs, including guilt tripping, where we make others feel responsible for our emotions, or problems and emotional blackmail, where we use fear, guilt, or obligation to manipulate others into compliance. When we find ourselves employing these tactics, it signals potential movement away from authentic relationship toward manipulative control. Behavioral and social warning signs. Isolation and information control represent critical behavioral warning signs. When we find ourselves gradually isolating from friends, family, and social connections that might challenge our beliefs, or avoiding information sources that contradict our worldview. These patterns mirror cult-like behavior that prevents healthy identity development. Hostility toward questioning emerges when outsiders' questions are met with hostility, or when we repeat canned information, rather than engaging authentically with challenges to our beliefs. Healthy identity development requires the ability to engage with questioning and criticism without defensive reaction. Loss of personal agency manifests when we demonstrate decreased capacity for independent decision-making, consistently deferring to groupthink or leader directives rather than exercising personal judgment. This represents a fundamental departure from the self-directed exploration and commitment that characterizes authentic identity formation. Strengthening critical thinking and media literacy. Developing robust critical thinking capabilities requires systematic attention to both cognitive processes and practical techniques for analyzing information sources. Metacognitive awareness development. Self-questioning emerges as the foundational metacognitive strategy. Research demonstrates that effective self-questioning involves pausing throughout tasks to consciously check our own actions, asking questions such as, is this the best way to carry out this task? Did I miss something? How could I do better next time? Metacognitive reflection enables us to develop awareness of our thinking processes as we learn. This includes asking students to submit reflections on topics before reading texts, and then revisiting those reflections after reading to consider how the information informed their thinking. Applied to daily life, this technique helps us track how new information influences our existing beliefs and assumptions. Planning and self-monitoring represent essential metacognitive strategies that help us understand our learning process, set clear goals, and manage our time. By reflecting on our progress and adjusting our approach, we become more independent and successful learners. Source analysis and contradiction detection. Systematic source evaluation requires developing structured approaches to analyzing information credibility. Research reveals that structured 7-step verification processes for evaluating the credibility of sources, authorship, messages, and legitimacy of media content significantly improve our ability to identify misleading information. Seeking alternative viewpoints represents a crucial media literacy skill. We must search for other articles and sources on the same topic, and if there are limited or no results, or we find contradicting information, we should do further research and fact-checking. This practice prevents the echo chamber effects that characterize cult-like thinking. Contradiction analysis involves systematically comparing sources to find information that differs between them, where the thing said by two sources cannot both be true. Research demonstrates that discrepancies increase readers' memory for sources and enhance retrieval of alternative perspectives. Cognitive bias recognition. Structured bias detection requires developing awareness of common cognitive biases that affect our judgment. Research in cognitive bias detection reveals that systematic patterns of deviation from rational judgment affect decision-making processes across various domains. Effective bias detection involves structured prompts designed to mimic cognitive bias reasoning patterns. Confirmation bias recognition becomes particularly important given that confirmation bias involves seeking information that confirms existing beliefs while avoiding contradictory evidence. We must develop practices for actively seeking disconfirming evidence and engaging seriously with perspectives that challenge our existing worldview. Hidden assumption identification requires looking at underlying beliefs and ideas that are being used to solve problems. Asking questions such as, what assumptions am I making? What am I assuming is true? What other possibilities exist? Self-reflection practices. Authentic assessment and reflection research demonstrates that authentic assessment accompanied by self-reflection not only enhances comprehension of theories but helps develop elements of self-concept, which is a key aspect of authentic leadership. This suggests that regular engagement with meaningful challenges followed by structured reflection supports authentic identity development. Values and beliefs exploration involves reflecting on how our decision-making process works and asking ourselves who we were trying to please. Understanding our personal characteristics, such as our likes, dislikes, competencies, and weaknesses, is crucial for making decisions that align with our genuine self. Autoethnographic practice can serve as a powerful tool to create new, unique perspectives on self-development. This involves writing about meaningful learning experiences and self-reflection on those episodes to identify associations that inspire our beliefs and practice. Identity integration techniques. Goal, identity, values, and emotions GIVE framework provides a structured approach to authentic identity development. Research in coaching psychology proposes 3 coaching models placed within the GIVE framework, relating to goals, identity, values, and emotions. This systematic approach helps ensure that identity development addresses all crucial dimensions rather than focusing narrowly on single aspects. Developmental authenticity involves inner sustainable development of one's characteristics as an individual self over a lifetime. This process requires contact with existing values and schemas from previous interactions with other people, one's own feelings and habitual interpretations. Consistency and coherence represent essential elements of healthy identity. Research demonstrates that well-developed identity comprises goals, values, and beliefs to which a person is committed, involving awareness of consistency in self over time, and recognition of this consistency by others. Building resilience against manipulation. Boundary development requires establishing healthy boundaries as a core component of healthy self-identity. This includes self-confidence, a growth mindset, emotional resilience, and high interdependence, lack of needing to seek external validation. Social connection diversification involves maintaining relationships outside any single group or ideology that provide essential feedback and perspective necessary for healthy identity development. Research demonstrates that isolation from outside influences represents a critical warning sign of cult-like control. Critical community engagement means actively seeking environments that encourage questioning, exploration, and intellectual honesty rather than conformity and groupthink. This includes participating in discussions where we can express thoughts and ideas in safe forums, applying critical analysis to the holographic mirror. The framework we've developed through our conversation, including the holographic mirror diagram, provides an excellent case study for applying these critical thinking principles. Strengths of the framework. Integrated perspective. The holographic mirror successfully integrates multiple dimensions of human experience, Ubuntu, temporal awareness, purpose, identity, action, and totality, without reducing consciousness to single aspects. This mirrors the multidimensional integration that characterizes healthy identity development. Balance and symmetry. The geometric representation suggests balance between expansion and return. reflecting the natural spiral of consciousness development, where growth involves both exploration and integration. Philosophical coherence. The framework draws from established spiritual and psychological traditions while avoiding dogmatic claims, demonstrating the kind of open questioning approach that characterizes authentic spiritual development. Potential vulnerabilities and questions. Complexity and accessibility. The sophisticated nature of the framework might create barriers to understanding that could be exploited by those seeking to position themselves as special interpreters or guides. We must ask, does this complexity serve authentic understanding or create artificial dependencies? Universal claims. While the framework avoids explicit universal claims, its comprehensive nature might implicitly suggest completeness. We should question, what perspectives or dimensions might this framework exclude or minimize? Application verification. The framework's abstract nature makes it difficult to verify through direct experience. We must consider, how can we test the practical value of these insights without falling into confirmation bias? Applying source analysis techniques. Multiple perspective integration. Our conversation has drawn from numerous sources across psychology, spirituality, and social science. This demonstrates the kind of comprehensive source evaluation that strengthens understanding rather than relying on single authorities. Contradiction identification. We've acknowledged tensions between different aspects of identity development, individual versus social, expansion versus integration, questioning versus commitment, rather than attempting to resolve them artificially. This mirrors healthy tolerance for ambiguity that characterizes mature thinking. Assumption questioning. Throughout our analysis, we've maintained awareness that our framework represents one perspective among many, rather than claiming exclusive truth. This demonstrates the kind of intellectual humility necessary for authentic development. Strengthening contradictory information detection. Systematic comparison techniques. Information triangulation involves systematically comparing multiple sources on the same topic to identify points of agreement and disagreement. Research demonstrates that when sources provide different kinds of information, this may not prove contradiction unless the information cannot be true at the same time. Source memory enhancement can be improved through exposure to conflicting information. Studies show that discrepancies increase readers' memory for sources and strengthen the relationship between respective sources. This suggests that actively seeking contradictory viewpoints enhances rather than confuses our analytical capabilities. Evidence-based evaluation requires developing systematic approaches to assessing the accuracy and value of information in learning resources, considering questions such as, who is the intended audience? What is the author's point of view? How is this work funded? Advanced detection techniques. Cognitive bias detection technology research reveals that advanced prompt engineering techniques can effectively leverage large language models' capabilities to recognize and mitigate biases. While we may not have access to such sophisticated tools, we can apply similar systematic questioning approaches to our own thinking. Multi-agent analysis involves considering how different personalities or perspectives might interpret the same information. We can apply this by consciously adopting different viewpoints when analyzing information, asking how someone with different values or experiences might interpret the same evidence. Pattern recognition focuses on identifying systematic patterns of deviation from rational judgment in both our own thinking and external sources. This includes recognizing when sources consistently confirm our existing beliefs versus challenging us to think differently. Conclusion: the ongoing journey of authentic development. Building and maintaining authentic identity while developing robust critical thinking capabilities represents an ongoing journey rather than a destination. The warning signs we've identified: cognitive distortions, emotional manipulation patterns, social isolation tendencies, and loss of personal agency, serve as early detection systems that help us maintain course toward genuine development. The critical thinking techniques we've explored: metacognitive awareness, systematic source analysis, contradiction detection, and cognitive bias recognition provide practical tools for navigating the complex information environment of contemporary life. These capabilities become particularly important when evaluating comprehensive frameworks like the holographic mirror, where the very sophistication and appeal of the system requires careful, ongoing scrutiny. The spiral metaphor from the holographic mirror remains relevant. Authentic development involves expansion and exploration, while maintaining connection to foundational principles of intellectual honesty, emotional authenticity, and social connection. The number 4, representing stability, foundation, and wholeness, reminds us that genuine growth requires periodic return to basic principles of critical thinking and self-reflection. Most importantly, the journey of authentic identity development requires embracing the paradox of confident uncertainty, maintaining strong commitment to our values and insights while remaining fundamentally open to new information, alternative perspectives, and the possibility that our current understanding represents only one valuable piece of a much larger puzzle. This balance between conviction and openness, between individual authenticity and social connection, between spiritual exploration and intellectual rigor, characterizes the mature consciousness that can navigate contemporary challenges while maintaining genuine freedom and authentic self-expression. The holographic principle suggests that each moment of authentic self-reflection contains information about the whole system of consciousness development. By attending carefully to the warning signs in our thinking and behavior, by systematically developing our critical thinking capabilities, and by maintaining the natural spiral of expansion and integration, we can build and maintain the kind of authentic identity that serves both our individual development and our contribution to the broader human community.